Following recent intelligence, a woman is stopped on the motorway. The woman was believed to be transporting Class A drugs from the private hospital she works at. These were found in the car. The woman admits the car isn't hers. She is arrested for possession with intention to sell and vehicle offences. Following a tip-off from a concerned neighbour, officers were called to a house to investigate a possible domestic abuse situation. The argument was between a couple. They both brush it off, saying it was just a heated argument at the time and everything's fine. There are no injuries to either party, just a verbal argument. It turns out the male of the residence is a fellow police officer and understands the call out. He plays the situation down to the attending officers. An elderly woman was burgled by a distraction in her home. Low value items are taken from her home, nothing too expensive, but these items are later discovered on eBay. The suspect is identified and arrested for burglary. The woman arrested for possession of vehicle crimes was driving the vehicle to pay off gambling debts she had recently got into trouble over with a loan shark. The couple investigated for domestic abuse were arguing over money issues that were having a damaging impact on their finances. The male had been spending savings on an online gambling website. The suspect burgling the elderly woman was trying to make money fast to spend at the bookies, was not targeting money specifically. Some crimes can appear obvious, but their motivations may not be what you think.
People with disordered gambling are 4.5 times more likely to be in prison than the rest of the general population. Good afternoon and welcome to our conference today. It's about taking a collaborative approach to tackling gambling harms across the criminal justice system. And it's my pleasure. I'm Graham England. I'm the Chief Executive of ARA Recovery for All. And we do a lot of work with gambling issues across the southwestern Wales. And I'm delighted to be hosting this today. Just a bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session so it can be viewed later. Please use the Q&A function in the bottom toolbar to raise any questions you may have. We're hoping to have a bit of time for some questions at the end of the session, but I don't want to curtail some of the great speakers we have today, so there may not be too much time available. We've got some fantastic speakers today, and I'll be introducing them throughout. And also, just to let you know, when you log off this session, you'll be sent a quick survey. Please take a couple of minutes to complete it. It'll be really useful. So that's at the end when you log off. But right now, let's go to our first speaker. I must say that our first speaker is has gone above and beyond the call of duty today. It's Matt Burton, and he's the Assistant Chief Constable of Cheshire Police, and he's a national lead on gambling across all the police forces. And I know he's been such a keen he's taken such a keen interest in problem gambling and issues around gambling and the criminal justice system. But unfortunately, he was due to be our opening speaker. But unfortunately, he's had a bit of a fall and he's in hospital. But just to demonstrate his commitment to us, he got up early this morning and he's done a video which we'll show now. So he even after a nasty fall, he's still got the commitment to turn up at this. So please run the video.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many people enrolled today. And it's my pleasure to open this event in my role as NPCC lead for problem gambling. In the last few years, we've learned a lot more about the links between problem gambling, gambling-related harms, policing, and the wider criminal justice system. My own force, Cheshire, originally piloted screening with a liaison and diversion provision at the first point of contact in custody suites. This ran in parallel to the criminal justice process and was complementary of other addictions such as drugs and alcohol, because we used an integrated service provider who is now providing this service in 16 other police force areas, which is fantastic. Beyond that, the work that I've been doing with the Howard League Commission on problem gambling, together with the Beacon Counselling Trust and Staffordshire University, has given us a real strong evidence base of what works, the touch points within the criminal justice system and problem gambling. So in regards to policing, we see the link and calls for service within the family setting, domestic abuse, homelessness, and unfortunately, when people think there is no way out, suicide. We see links to organised crime, in particular money laundering, and we see theft and fraud to fuel addiction. But unlike drugs and alcohol, we're only just beginning to understand the effects of problem gambling on the individuals, their families, the criminal justice system, and society, in my opinion. One of the Commission's papers, A State of Play, was recently released, and it identified a number of issues and suggested actions for policing, the CPS, Her Majesty's Courts, the Prison Service and Probation Service. But in terms of policing, the recommendations related to screening for gambling in all custody suites, integrated services to understand the complexity and links to gambling and other addictions, the adoption of out-of-court disposals for offending and offences where problem gambling is prevalent, and treatment pathways to run in parallel to the criminal justice process with pre-sentence reports in the same way that other addictions are catered for, and an international review to identify best practice and what works. So it's my absolute pleasure today to introduce you to Bet You Can Help, the first level 2 Ofqual regulated qualification, which has been accredited by the Royal Society for Public Health and which is open to anyone. Free to those within the criminal justice system, is the first step in helping organisations understand the issues and how they can support those involved. This is just the beginning of a wider conversation for me. There'll be opportunities for questions, and if you want any of the team to contact you afterwards for a wider discussion, then I know they'd be delighted to do so. So I hope you enjoy the next 2 hours, and thank you for attending.
I think that's testament to the commitment of Matt and the pilot that and the forward thinking that has happened at Cheshire Police, together with Beacon Counselling Trust, starting to acknowledge the role that gambling plays in crime, and the work that they've done to identify gambling issues within the arrested population. Matt mentioned Bet You Can Help, which is a fantastic gambling first aid course to enable people to have the confidence to tackle and talk about gambling issues wherever and whatever the setting. So we'll hear far more about that today. Matt also mentioned the Howard League for Penal Reform, and I'm delighted now to introduce Andrew Nielsen. He's the Director of Campaigns for the Howard League. And the Howard League launched the Commission on Crime and Gambling in 2019. So over to you, Andrew, and thank you.
Thank you. If I could have the next slide. Thank you. So good afternoon, I'm Andrew Nielsen. I'm Director of Campaigns at the Howard League for Penal Reform. I'm also a member of the Commission on Crime and Problem Gambling. I am here today to give you a readout on what's titled there, The State of Play of the Commission's work. And Matt mentioned a publication called State of Play. It isn't actually published quite yet, but it will be very, very shortly. And I will talk about that today because we are at, I think, an important juncture where we're making the Commission's first major policy intervention. We could have the next slide. Just a few words about the Howard League, which set up and is supporting the Commission. We're the oldest penal reform organisation in the world. We were set up in 1866. The image there of the statue is of John Howard, commonly thought of as the first prison reformer. And we were set up by admirers of Howard in 1866. So during the last century, the Howard League has been at the forefront of many landmark criminal justice reforms, from the abolition of corporal and capital punishment, hanging and flogging, to the formation of the probation service and the introduction of the first support services for victims of crime. We're a charity independent of government. We campaign for less crime, safer communities, fewer people in prison. And as the slide there says, we also have consultative status with international bodies, the United Nations and the Council of Europe. So on to the Commission itself. It was, as we've just heard from Graham, launched in 2019, and it's scheduled to run until the end of 2022. The chair of the Commission is pictured there. That is Lord Peter Goldsmith QC, a former Attorney General. And he leads a team of commissioners comprising of academics and professionals with expertise in both criminal justice and public health, as well as experts with knowledge of the gambling industry and with lived experience of addiction. And the Commission's brief, very broadly, is to answer the three questions there on the slide. What are the links between problem gambling and crime? What impact do these links have on communities and society? And what should be done? One of the key ways that we're seeking to answer these questions is through research. And the Commission published a review last year which assessed the academic literature covering jurisdictions such as Australasia, the United States, Canada, Germany, Scandinavia, and of course the UK. And the review found that while millions of people are affected by gambling, either directly or indirectly, there appear to be fewer than 50 peer-reviewed papers in the last 24 years that address the links between problem gambling and crime. If the overall quantity of the research was not huge, there was nonetheless a consistency in findings across all the jurisdictions. Research analysis suggested that there is a high incidence of people committing crimes to fund their gambling. A wide variety of crimes are committed as a result of gambling addiction, not just white-collar crimes such as theft and fraud, but also offences that occur in public spaces, such as street robbery. There is significant evidence of domestic abuse and child neglect linked to some problem gambling behaviour as well. Studies also indicate that the more complex, prolonged and persistent a gambling problem is, the more likely it is that a crime will be committed, and indeed that many crimes may then result. Nevertheless, there are lots of gaps in our knowledge. And we've started to approach these gaps in the research by commissioning research projects as part of our work. One, and they're listed there on the slide, one on sentencers' understanding and treatment of problem gambling is about to be published. The second, on lived experience, should be published before the end of this year. And we're also in the process of recruiting academic researchers for the other two projects listed on that slide, one on women and another exploring the experiences of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. The experiences of those two groups are particularly under-researched and under-reported on, which is why we're keen to do specific strands of work there. Next slide, please. Thank you, you're anticipating well. So I said at the beginning of my remarks that we are about to publish a policy paper, and that is the publication pictured on this slide, and it is called State of Play. And it does summarise effectively the evidence uncovered by the Commission so far, including the findings from the research with sentencers that I've just mentioned. The briefing makes some initial recommendations to government and policymakers, and indeed Matt touched on those in his short film, and I will flesh them out in a minute. As well as the research that I've outlined, the Commission held a call for written evidence, and we've held a series of oral evidence sessions with witnesses from a wide range of backgrounds. We've heard from the Gambling Commission, Gamble Aware, GamCare, gambling operators, the Gambling Related Harm All-Party Parliamentary Group, witnesses with lived experience of problem gambling and crime, and criminal justice professionals. So what have we found from that evidence? The next slide will outline that a little bit. So I think the first 3 points on this slide will surprise nobody in the audience. But we have found that problem gambling leads to crime, as it is an escalating addiction, which requires escalating funds. There is a lack of knowledge or targeted activity within the criminal justice system as regards crime related to problem gambling. And despite problem gambling being a recognised mental health disorder, the criminal justice system is not responding to related offending in an appropriate way. And that third point is clear from our research with sentencers. Problem gambling, for example, is not considered to be a mitigating factor in sentencing in the way that mental health problems or drug and alcohol addiction are. And following on from that, the fourth point on this slide, the confiscation of assets under the Proceeds of Crime Act needs to be reviewed. This point was a strong theme of the evidence we received from those with lived experience. Indeed, it is also a recurring theme in the lived experience research, which we'll be publishing later this year. The Proceeds of Crime Act, or POCA, is legislation designed with drug dealers in mind to confiscate their ill-gotten gains. Problem gamblers who steal from their employers, for example, are not making money from that crime. They are losing the money or ploughing any winnings straight back into gambling. And pursuing them after being sentenced, or more often than not pursuing their loved ones, is really inappropriate. And it's causing terrible problems as people try to rebuild their lives after the traumatic event of somebody potentially disclosing their problem and then going through the criminal justice system is a direct result of that disclosure. So this issue around proceeds of crime is something we'll be focusing on to get change. And then on this slide before you, we have some further recommendations. So there is a danger that responses to problem gambling and crime can lead to what we call up-tariffing, where a more severe punishment is handed down by the courts. For example, by replacing fines with community orders and treatment requirements. Now, we don't advocate for creating whole new ways of punishing people who commit crime through problem gambling. We don't think we need special court orders for problem gambling at this stage. The emphasis should be on diverting from the criminal justice system and getting people into treatment and support wherever possible. There are, as this slide says, examples of good practice, and the work that the Beacon Counselling Trust has done with Cheshire Police immediately springs to mind. And we feature that work in our publication. GamCare was also doing some interesting work across the criminal justice system in Hertfordshire prior to COVID, and we highlight that too. Our key recommendation to the Ministry of Justice, the Whitehall department responsible for the system, the key recommendation is also on this slide. So we do say, as a first step, the Ministry of Justice should review what improvements can be made, including awareness raising and training among practitioners, the assessment of individuals in the system, and improving specialist services. And that means identifying the availability of services locally and signposting individuals to those services. And we are at a moment of opportunity for this to happen, because the probation service, which was part privatised some years ago, has been reunified within the public sector. And there's an opportunity to extend good practice into the new probation model that is now being developed. And there may also be opportunities to encourage innovation funds within the new probation model, regional innovation funds, and police and crime commissioners who have their own funding to help potentially fund work locally. We think the Ministry of Justice can also take small but important steps which will not only improve practice, but help to build a picture on the prevalence of crime related to problem gambling. If we could just go back to the previous slide for a second. And I'm pleased to say that that work that we need the Ministry of Justice to do is already in hand. They are addressing these recommendations before we even publish. So I should, for example, be speaking before the end of this year at an event organised by the Ministry of Justice for courts and probation practitioners, which will launch official materials, so not our materials, these are official Ministry of Justice materials that will help with awareness raising amongst, for example, probation officers of the issues. And it should start the ball rolling on better assessment of individuals in the system and the identification of referral pathways to services in the community. And finally, and this is why I wanted this slide back up, but that last bullet point on the Sentencing Council, which is the body that provides guidance to sentencers on the decisions that they make. Our research with sentencers, which was mainly with magistrates, shows that there is clearly a need for guidance to the courts on problem gambling and crime. So we do think that the Sentencing Council has a role to help produce that guidance and support sentencers in better decision making. For example, explaining why problem gambling related to crime, problem gambling can be a mitigating factor in their decisions. as it would be with alcoholism or drug addiction. Finally, on the last slide, which is really just a placeholder for next steps, but what are we going to be doing next? We are running for another year until the end of 2022. Well, one of the first things we clearly want to do is publish the briefing I've just described and publicise the work and publicise really the reasons why the system needs to be better responding to crime related to problem gambling. And we do hope to do that very soon. We're hard at work with a media partner on that. We also intend to publish the research on sentencing at the same time as that policy briefing. And as I mentioned, the sentencing on lived experience should follow hot on the heels of that before the end of the year. And we are looking at producing some further work, for example, around the role of the police as the agency which makes first contact with individuals who may have committed crime where problem gambling is a factor. And as I've said earlier, the use of the Proceeds of Crime Act clearly needs to be addressed. And this is something that we think we'll be taking as a message to government moving forward, as it might be something we can get a quick win on. And in the end, can we flesh out the answers to those 3 questions the Commission was set up to answer? What are the links between problem gambling and crime? What impact do these links have on communities and society? And what should be done? And it's that third question, what should be done, which is particularly important. I've outlined some of the ways in which the criminal justice system can better respond to problem gambling and crime, but lasting solutions lie outside of the criminal justice system in a properly funded public health approach. What might that look like? Well, we may well hear a bit more about that today. And to add a fourth question, what lessons might other jurisdictions around the world hold for us? The Commission continues to take oral evidence from experts, and we intend to make further policy recommendations in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I don't know about other people on this programme today, but it makes my heart sing to think that a government ministry is taking on some of the recommendations even before they're published. I mean, I think that's great work to be able to do that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. We will hear a bit further today from people that are working closely in the diversion and liaison space for people with a gambling issue. And just to give a little bit of an offer really to you, Andrew. I think Beacon and ARA would welcome being able to give people on the Sentencing Council and those that are sentencing some training with the first aid manual of Bet You Can Help. So that's going to be available free when you speak to them. And just another plug, actually, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, and a little bit of the work that Beacon and ARA are doing in around breaking the Sharam and working with the South Asian communities is something that we are very keen to make sure that we're in those communities and helping them to look at the link between gambling and crime. We'll move on now. So thank you very much, Andrew. That was really helpful. We're moving on now to Neil Platt. Neil's the clinical director of Beacon Counselling Trust. Neil and Beacon are a lot of the cutting edge of some of the new activities in and around the gambling treatment space and early interventions. It's my pleasure to count Neil as a trusted friend and colleague, and we do quite a lot of work together. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Neil and he can tell you more about what's going on. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Graham. First of all, good afternoon to everybody. And it's my privilege to lead on this programme alongside Matt, who you've heard from, Graham, Brian Faint at the Beacon Counselling Trust, Andy Todd from RCA, and our work with David Best. It really is amazing the work that we've done, as Graham said, at the cutting edge, and how we've developed some of these initiatives. And it's even more amazing the sign up for the conference today. Over 200 individuals, I think it was 220 when I last looked, had signed up for the conference. And I think it really does reflect the interest in this subject matter, which is great to see. So building on both from Matt's introduction and the work with the Howard League, which I sit on as a commissioner, I think maybe it's just good to reflect a bit, something on a bit broader, on a bit of a broader footing, the landscape regarding gambling-related harm and criminality in the UK, which is obviously our primary subject today. So let's just look at two cornerstones of research, and let's build on some key assumptions here. First of all, half the individuals experiencing harmful gambling commit a crime, and somewhere in the UK, research suggests there's about 1.4 million harmful gamblers. So that gives you about 700,000 individuals that could be in some ways presenting to the criminal justice system at one of its various touch points. And yet there is no consistent messaging or protocols across the criminal justice system to engage or to deal with this issue, which is quite remarkable in a way. In our opinion, and that's the opinion of the team, we need to change this for I would quote probably 3 reasons. First of all, as Andrew stated, there's a clear and evidence base in terms of the relationship between gambling-related harm and criminality. Secondly, from an evidence-based, again, perspective, it's a public health issue. But thirdly, and more importantly, maybe it's just the right thing to do. So to reinforce this perspective, let me ask what I would seem a simple question. And this is something that our team feels quite strongly about. Why does gambling addiction have a stronger link to criminality than other addictions? Well, we haven't got the time to ponder that for too long today. So let me take you to what we believe is the answer. And the answer is that as the gambling harm severity increases, so does its appetite for more money. However, this is without the saturation regulatory threshold, as we call them, the pass-out levels seen in drugs and alcohol. So the reality of it is it's insatiable and linked only to the potential funding options. So as this becomes more acute, it's actually linked to criminality. And I believe that one of the things that we mustn't lose sight of here, and as we look at this model, the gamblers regularly believe through their various cognitive distortions that ultimately, if I can get my hands on more money, I will solve the issue. So gambling got me into this mess, so gambling will get me out of it. Very, very simple statement. So the issue becomes more aggravated and acute and continues until the money invariably runs out, often involving criminality to fund. Pretty simple, really. But let's explore this maybe in more detail and move away, as Andrew Nielsen quoted, let's move away from just the harm that there is to the gambler. Maybe we need to broaden this. And we look at this pyramid here, and we can see from the basis of where it starts, minor thefts from friends and family, often affecting others, domestic abuse, intimidation, etc. Moving up to engagement with illegal money lending, etc. And then, which is the touch point we often find for engagement with the criminal justice system, is theft from employers. We will move on to pre-planned criminality, theft and major fraud, community violence and homicide, and serious and organised. So as the severity of the clinical presentation increases, so does its relationship with criminality. Consequently, this is a public health issue and requires a public health approach. So let's just take this simple public health model. And as the gambling severity increases, so does its relationship with criminality and the need for a more acute public health intervention. However, our first touch point here is that of universal education across the wider public health footprint. This is one of the primary aims of Bet You Can Help, and I'll move on to that in a minute. So moving on to some broader public health statistics, and many of you may have seen this, but I think it's one of the first pieces of work that stimulated this public health relationship. And a problem gambler, as it was quoted in the original report, and we moved on to the term harmful gambler, is 3 times more likely to be claiming job seekers allowance, 9 times more likely to be accessing homelessness services, 5 times more likely approximately to be in prison, 9 times more likely to be accessing mental health services, 9 times more likely to be in a hospital inpatient within the last 3 months, and 3 times more likely to have visited their GP in the last 12 months with a mental health issue. Now that came from the IPPR report, Cards on the Table, back in December 2016. And we moved on quite a bit since then. However, the question is, what can we do to engage with this issue, an under-engaged issue within the criminal justice setting? Well, my first response is that we can implement the Better You Can Help model or the Better You Can Help framework. It's a first aid approach to gambling-related harm. It engages with the first point of contact, in particular with vulnerable groups like the criminal justice system. The first point of engagement, making every contact count. It equips learners with gambling-related harm knowledge, skills and attitudes to perform early intervention. And it signposts and refers to various specialist service provisions that are within the National Gambling Treatment Service structure. It dovetails into the National Strategy for Reducing Gambling Harms, as led by the Gambling Commission, around the 2 pillars of prevention and education and treatment and support. So why do we need it, and what's our vision? Let's begin with this very, very simple statistic. Depending on the evidence, over 2 million individuals in the UK are suffering some form of gambling-related harm. And from that 2 million individuals, we get about 40,000 accessing the National Helpline and about 15,000 into treatment of any form. That's poor population penetration by any measurement. The Better You Can Help programme, and that as its heart the Level 2 award in tackling gambling-related harms, as the first universal accredited education platform, is to increase individuals into treatment from 3 to 15%, that's up to 51,000 over the next 3 years, as well as providing early support to these at-risk groups, as I said, one of which is the criminal justice system, using a first aid foundation. Now, this 15% that we mention is comparable to those accessing services from drug and alcohol platforms, and is an achievable target, we believe, over the next 3 years. Our mission is that we want to drive down the numbers of people suffering gambling-related harms, whilst at the same time increase the numbers of individuals accessing appropriate treatment and support. Our mission is underpinned by a strong belief that those in helping roles, like the criminal justice service or system, are best placed to be mobilised as community connectors to engage and support those in need. So how can you help? My first invitation is that by taking up one of the following training options, which we have 3. The first is the Better You Can Help Now, which is Tackling Gambling Harm's 1-hour training workshop, just 1 hour. It's designed to focus on awareness of gambling-related harm, give the background to it, show people how to screen and signpost individuals to appropriate support services. It's appropriate for every member of staff. It's a universal offer. As we move up the levels, it's a level 2. And the second level is the Better You Can Help Level 2 award in tackling gambling-related harms, Ofqual regulated, RSPH approved and accredited, full day program, 7 hours, which has a full assessment at the end of it, 40 minutes. And we believe that's appropriate for an organisational champion in every location. And finally, we've got your Better You Can Help Train the Trainer program, 3-day course that includes the Level 2 award in tackling gambling-related harms and provides an approval to deliver programs under the Better You Can Help structure. And we believe that's appropriate for one individual in every organisation. And these are free. This is a major public health initiative to tackle gambling-related harm in the criminal justice system. It is not a criminal justice initiative. It is a public health initiative for the Criminal Justice Service. So, our offer, we invite you to take it up. It's an invitation. All the training offers are free. That's the 3 levels. Bacon Help Now, level 2, train the trainer. Let's give gambling-related harm a seat at the table when compared to the likes of drugs and alcohol within the criminal justice system. Let's make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. I think it's really important to state that that the Bet You Can Help training is all to do with practicalities. I've noted from one of the questions that we've received at the moment is that, you know, what can we do practically to tackle gambling as an issue in the criminal justice system? And the Bet You Can Help program is specifically aimed at action-orientated interventions. It doesn't turn people into counsellors, but what it does do is it gives people a sound grounding, as Neil stated. Thank you very much for your time. We'll move on now, and we'll move on to Nicola Tatti. She's a Health and Justice National Implementation Manager at NHS England, and leads on liaison and diversion, in particular in female pathways. I think this is where this was mentioned in Andrew's talk and in Matt's. So we'll hand over to Nicola now, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham. And Graham, just apologies, I'm going to have to leave my camera off because my technology works better without, if that's all right. So, afternoon, everybody, and it's great to see how many people have attended this conference today. I think it really shows how hard that Neil, Matt, other guys, other colleagues have really worked to drive this particular topic. So my name's Nicola Tutte, and I make up part of the NHS England's National Health and Justice team. So I lead within Health and Justice on the National Liaison and Diversion Programme. So what I wanted to do today was really give you a bit of a quick whistle-stop tour and a bit of an overview of the Liaison and Diversion Programme, who we are, what we do as a programme, and where we're at with supporting problematic gambling. So the L&D programme is a cross-government initiative. It's led and funded by NHS England, and we have a programme board of stakeholders and members that are made up by the Department of Health and Social Care, Home Office, Ministry of Justice, the Youth Justice Board, HM Courts and Tribunal Service, and Public Health England. Next slide, please. So the Liaison and Diversion Programme. So where did it come from? So the Liaison and Diversion Programme is a response to the 2009 Bradley Report, and the Bradley Report identified 82 recommendations with regard to disproportionate representation of people with mental health, learning disability, and wider social vulnerabilities who enter the criminal justice system. And something that our very own Lord Bradley often says is we can't keep pulling people out of the river, we need to go upstream and see why they're falling in. So it's around looking at what's the driving factors to people entering the criminal justice system, the identification, assessment and referral into appropriate services. So the recommendation that the L&D programme is based on is that all police custody suites should have access to a liaison and diversion service. These services would include improved screening, identification of individuals with mental health, learning disability and wider vulnerabilities, providing information to police and prosecutors to facilitate the earliest possible diversion of offenders with mental health disorders from the criminal justice system, and signposting into local health and social services where appropriate. So what do L&D services look like? So the L&D services are built up of multidisciplinary teams. They're built to address a wide range of vulnerabilities. They're made up of mental health nurses, learning disability nurses, specialist roles, peer support, outreach workers, etc. So the services are around providing early intervention for vulnerable people as they come into the attention of the criminal justice system. And that's at various points of the criminal justice system, whether it's really early on, such as voluntary attendees, out of court disposals, within the custody suites, within the courts, feeding into pre-sentence reports, everything up to the point of sentence. So it's around providing prompt response to concerns raised by police, youth offending teams, probation or court staff, or any criminal justice decision maker. It's about providing that critical information to the decision makers so they can then make appropriate decisions around charging and sentencing. And it's about referral and assertive follow-up to individuals to be able to access and treatment and rehabilitation appointments. So often without L&D services, vulnerabilities might go unidentified until untreated until they reach the point of prison sentence. So the National Service Specification, we are very much around early identification. We're an all-age service, so we work with both the youth and adult system. And we target a range of vulnerabilities. And over the last 2 to 3 years, we've really moved our service specification from being quite a clinical model to really look at that trauma-informed, more holistic, bringing health and holistic together and really looking at wider vulnerabilities. So we operate in the police custody suites, in the courts, and a various range of community settings. And we're about providing access to clients to a range of supported referral pathways. And along the way, over the last few years, we've really developed a number of specialised pathways within liaison and diversion services, such as gender specific, indecent image, veterans, and so on. So the current position for liaison and diversion, we're now 100% rolled out. So we've got L&D coverage across the whole of England. This was achieved in April 2020. So we're now in every police custody in England. We're seeing more than 135,000 people engage with L&D services every year. 22% of our cases or our caseloads, our throughput, are females. And we're seeing a range of needs and vulnerabilities, mental health. I think 70% of our work is mental health within the adult world, 47% in the children and young people's world. Alcohol misuse, 32% of adults and 10% of children, young people. 31% of adults and 23% of children around accommodation, financial needs, learning disability and social and communication difficulties. So in a nutshell, L&D is about identification, assessment and referral into appropriate services to reduce health inequalities and help support reoffending. So L&D and gambling and where we're at. So for myself, coming from a background of a frontline worker in various different positions in the field of diverting people into service, this element of work's been a breath of fresh air, because I think back to many years ago as a frontline practitioner and often identifying people who had gambling addiction and being really stuck as a practitioner thinking, where do I go from here? I think it was an area of work where there was a lack of awareness, there was a lack of understanding, and there was no intervention. So it's great to see all the work that Neil, Matt, Graham, the rest of the guys on the conference today, the Howard League, how much they've really driven this element of work and what they've done with it. So L&D, we've worked closely with the gambling associations, such as the colleagues on today, to really raise awareness within the L&D programme. We've worked collaboratively to present a national workshop for L&D and the wider non-custodial programmes to raise awareness around the gambling issues and to promote the need for liaison and diversion services to really link in and develop gambling pathways. So we've encouraged L&D services to link in with gambling intervention providers locally to develop referral pathways. So a collaborative approach for us. So L&D really welcomes these new elements of work, the new roles that are going to be within policing around the identification of gambling and referral into intervention. And we really want to ensure that our service providers work closely with police and the new gambling role providers to ensure that we work in collaboration to really develop an appropriate kind of identification, assessment and pathway into service, to ensure that we really work together to ensure that those clients get the best of everything of L&D and the new pros. And we want to really kind of encourage our L&D service providers to access the training that's been developed, which is great, and look at how the role fits within alongside L&D services. So I've just put on the next one, any questions, but I think if there's any questions that, you know, if I'm happy to email or contact myself.
Nicola, thank you very much, and thank you for managing your technology so well. I think, one of the questions that has been raised is about somebody's personal circumstances, finding that themselves that they were serving a prison sentence, and it was halfway through their prison sentence before gambling was mentioned. I think that's such a terrible position. And I think what we're aiming to do with this conference and with the training and with all of the work, and particularly from the liaison and diversion and working in gambling, is to change the culture of gambling and the criminal justice system, and it's to put it at the heart of it and to make sure that people are asked those questions and screened from arrest and worked with in custodial settings should that be the route that people are in. So I think there's some fantastic work going on, but we mustn't withstand that we're starting from a ground floor up, and I think it's some of the liaison and diversion activities and the key work of your colleagues that is changing the culture in the criminal justice system. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Graham.
We'll move on now to our next speaker. Now, our next speaker is David Best, and he's a professor of criminology at the University of Derby. David is well known in the field, and I've known him for a very long time, and he's a fantastic fella. And his work is in and around building a lot of work people may have known from building recovery communities and talking about recovery for all addictions. David can't stay with us till the end, so if anybody has any questions for David in the Q&A sections, if they could mark specifically for the attention of David, and then what we'll do is we'll make sure that we forward on to him after the event. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to an old friend and colleague, David Best.
Thanks very much, Graham. It's great to see you, and thanks to you and Neil for inviting me today. I'm going to pick up on some. Well, firstly, actually, can we move on to the next slide, because nobody needs to see my face twice. I think that's definitely a bad thing. So, right, okay, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk to you about community connections, which was something that Neil mentioned. So I'm just going to say a little bit of my own background. I've worked in rehabilitation of offenders and recovery from drug addiction for approximately 30 years now. And one of the things that has become apparent to me in that time is we need to think much, much more, not just about the initial act of stopping, but how we maintain and manage successes for people who manage to stop offending and manage to stop addictions temporarily. Because that recovery journey is typically something like 5 years in duration, the average length of time till people can be described as stably desisting and in recovery. And communities play a big part in that. And one of the things that I've been so pleased to see in the last decade or so is that we now have a much, much better understanding and a metric of what counts as the resources people need to manage and sustain effective change. And In the addictions field, this has been called recovery capital, and increasingly in the criminal justice field, we're calling it assistance capital. And what it allows us to do is to start to measure things that allow us to say where somebody is, what resources they have. It's a strengths-based approach that is about accruing and sustaining resources. Next slide, please. And I'm delighted to say that this is from the Biden-Harris proclamation at the start of the year for the Office of National Drug Control Policy in America. And this notion of recovery capital is now firmly entrenched in US drug policy. And in fact, that translates into funding. And we are hoping with the Dame Carol Black review for drug and alcohol that the same will happen in the UK. It's slower to happen around assistance, but we hope it will get there. And there are clear implications for what it means for gambling. And I'm going to just spend a minute or two talking about why community connections are important in terms of how people build up that change in recovery capital. So next slide, please. Perfect. So I've done a big project in Glasgow and Birmingham on how people recover in 2008, 2009. And I combined the data from Glasgow and Birmingham with a US researcher called Alexandra Lodi, who'd gathered data in New York on pathways to recovery. And one of the things that's really important about our understanding of how we measure recovery capital is almost a flip around of the logic of how people manage change. So traditional addiction treatment model is we work on the internal change process, the personal capital, building up all those things like self-esteem, self-efficacy, resilience, coping skills, communication skills. And we assume that they will then help people to build social networks and effective engagement with things like houses and jobs. And in the original model, we referred to this as collective recovery capital. Increasingly, we call it community capital. What my work has increasingly shown me over the last decade is that that's really not how this model works. I mean, the three slices of the pie are synergistic and interlinked, but crucially, it takes a long time for people to develop those internal coping qualities and resilience qualities, and they primarily do it through other people. That over the course of their change journeys, what supports people to make effective change is changing their social networks and being effectively engaged with the collective or community capital model. And really, the part of Neil's presentation that I'm going to focus on is this notion of community connection and community capital, which is the bottom part of this slide. So next slide, please. What are we trying to do to allow people to effectively engage with community resources? And bear in mind, this is predicated on the assumption that people at that low point of engagement with justice and extensive addiction problems have relatively low capital. They've typically burnt their bridges with families, friends. They'll often have lost jobs. They may be in trouble with their houses. In gambling, though, as Neil and Graham have both said, they'll have significant debt. So the aim is to try and effectively engage people with community resources. And it's a staged process. We need to identify and engage with those community resources. And where the connectors come in is they become the human pathways that allow people to effectively engage with the pro-social groups, that allow individuals to meet their individual life needs and aspirations, that build hopes and strengths, and that allow personalised interests and activities compatible with their skills and needs. Now, they will vary person to person. But with the exception of a very small group of people, effective engagement in new support systems is the mechanism through which people can build those internal skills and resources. Next slide, please. And there are two primary groups of people that you will see for whom community connectors are essential. Those who are socially isolated and excluded, and those who have networks, but whose networks are harmful to their recovery and their change processes. And in the alcohol and drug field, there have been a number of studies that have shown the biggest predictor of effective change and recovery is transition in networks supportive of substance use to people involved with networks supportive of their recovery. And there's a clear stage process to doing this. We have to work out what those assets are that are out there. But that's not enough. That just becomes a directory, which becomes obsolete very quickly. The connector group are key, and they typically will be the lived experience individuals, people with their own lived experience who, as part of the redemption scripts, want to give something back, who will be the champions and drivers and the human bridges into community assets. People will frequently not be able, because of low self-esteem and low confidence, to be able to engage. So allowing, preparing and supporting people to engage with these groups is crucial. And one of the things, just to give you a very quick example, when we did this in Sheffield, we trained 21 people in drug recovery up to be community connectors, and we got them to go out into Sheffield and open and identify doors, and they identified 135 different groups where the activities across 4 areas: education, training, employment, sport, recreation and arts, volunteering and community engagement, and recovery and mutual aid. But we have to be able to create these feedback loops and pathways to allow folk to effectively engage. So this work has been going on, and I have 2 PhD students, one who I'm pleased to say passed her Viva last week, called Beth Collinson, who did her work in Sheffield, and that related to the work I've just done. The second, Zeddy Chowdhury, is doing her work in Auckland in New Zealand. And what we've done here is to create this model of peer empowerment through asset-based community engagement. In effect, what people do when they engage in a new resource or community asset is they provide us with ratings, almost like a TripAdvisor score, about how did you find each of those groups. And this is just an example from Sheffield about some of the responses we got. But when people are positive and we get a little row of greens across the bottom, we then ask that person to be the community connector. So each peer becomes a renewal, a new person to act to do that community connection. I'm going to move on from that, and I want to talk about one particular study that I've been involved in 2 areas. First in Blackpool a few years ago, and now in Middlesbrough, where the aim of recovery was basically to try and get people primarily coming out of prison, Preston and Wymont prisons, to physically build recovery stock in their town. And so the 2 parts of the title that are fairly obvious was, it was giving people a job, so they did an apprenticeship in the building trade, and it gave them a safe place to live. Half of the houses were sold to fund the social enterprise, the other half provided employment. Next slide, please. And we got, in the first 50 people who went through in the first year, we got the most astonishing effects. We got these enormous reductions in offending rates for people who were given meaningful activities and who were given safe places to live. In the period before Jobs, Friends and Houses, the average offending rate was 2.46 per person. In the period, first year of Jobs, Friends and Houses, it was 0.15 per person, a 94.1% reduction in offending. And you will see the impact on the next slide in the cost to the public purse. And this is only 50 people. However, and the crucial part of this, next slide please, is that it wasn't just called Jobs and Houses. It was about friends. We did an analysis of using 2 methods called linguistic inquiry and word count and social network analysis, that the jobs and the houses mattered, but effective engagement in the community was crucial. The more central people were to the network, the more engaged they were in the social network, and the more they perceived themselves as part of the group, the better they did in Jobs, Friends and Houses. And in addiction studies, retention is a proxy for outcome. Why is this important? Because what this did was show that for people to sustain meaningful change, they need meaningful activities to do, they need a safe place to live, but crucially, they also need a sense of connection. Now, very last slide, and I realise I'm running out of time. Sadly, for doing 30 years of work in this field, my work can be summarised in this diagram of an ice cream cone. And basically, what I want to show here is that this model is cumulative and generative for communities. One of my academic mentor is a man called John Braithwaite from the Australian National University. And he will frequently say, social capital is not like financial capital. As we all know, if you have financial capital and you spend it, you have less of it at the end. Social capital and community capital don't work like that. The more of it you use, the more of it there is afterwards. Why is that important? Because as we engage in effective community connections, which is the middle and top layer of the ice cream cone, not only does it drop down and benefit the individual who is effectively engaged, it creates the sprinkles. So there is residual benefit in the community. And this is something we now know about both crime and about recovery, that the more you engage in visible, active community connections with recovery community, the stronger the weak social links and the stronger the sense of trust, which is referred to as collective efficacy, exists in the community. In other words, recovery benefits not only the individuals in the community, it benefits the community itself. Thank you very much, Graham.
Thank you very much, David. And I think it links back to the earlier one of the earlier presentations in and around we got to stop pulling people out of the river. We got to stop putting them into the river. It sounds very much the ice cream cone analogy sounds very much to me like turning a vicious cycle into a virtuous circle, and you build a whirlwind of strength-based capital. And I think that's how we make significant change in society. So once again, thank you very much, David. And if anybody has any questions for David, please make them clear in the questions and answers, and we'll make sure we get them to him. So thanks very much. We're going to move on now. And again, this thing, you would almost think that we didn't make this session up today. This links nicely into speaking to Nicola. Now, Nicola's is a lived experience speaker, and I know that her story will be gripping, but it will tie up this first session of what we've been doing today. So over to you, Nicola, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks to everyone for this opportunity. I want to talk a little bit on the impact of crime within the family unit. And it was a pivotal moment, an actual threat to life, where the fallout of my ex-partner's gambling addiction really crossed the line. It was a distressing incident at the family home where he'd rolled up after a 3-day gambling and drinking binge in the early evening. And I can't tell you why that day, but my instinct was to hit record on my phone. But I know now it was sheer desperation, because I needed somebody, anybody, to listen to the abuse, the fear, and ultimately the relentless behaviour we'd been subject to for nearing 18 months. And it's a pattern of behaviours common with the disorder that many people just can't fathom. Unlike before, this time was different, because this time it happened in front of our children. And the sobs and the screaming, they still haunt me now. And it's because I remember feeling how it actually come to this. I'd like to say it was his rock bottom, but it was mine. Given the intensity of the scenes that day, it was a neighbour, not me, who called the police. The resulting investigation was limited, and it was despite me sharing every detail I had on our family situation and the grip this addiction had taken on all our lives. And sat in a station for more than 2 hours, I still didn't even know then if what I was doing was the right thing to do. Months later, the head detective for finance and fraud personally called me to say, given the complexities and the tied finances within our relationship, it meant pursuing any charges of fraud relating to tens of thousands of pounds of debt I'd been left in would be difficult. Even if it got past the CPS and there was no guarantee, at best there was a chance of a suspended sentence, but even more likely a caution. And that was even if it was something I wanted to explore. My goal was to get him help. It's a position no doubt a lot more families in my situation find themselves in. It was similar in relation to the financial abuse and the coercive control, but that by this time was evident in the relationship. And it was evident that this had taken a physical and mental toll on me and my family. would some level of intervention and support here have helped our cause? It was also this incident that had forced me to take the route of family court proceedings. And this too only cemented the belief that the lack of understanding around gambling disorder went right to the centre of the system. The words of one judge in one sitting stand out to me. Some people don't always need treatment, they can grow out of it. I'd invested time, energy, and every penny in a bid to keep my family safe, and while trying to get someone I loved into some effective treatment provision. I hadn't been entitled to legal aid throughout because the debt wasn't recognised in the means testing. My legal bills at the end of 2019 stood at £12,000, and that was on top of gambling debt that I still had to pay. And through all this, the dilemma as a parent is how much emotional neglect and trauma you can willingly allow your children to suffer without being accused of child alienation. I never wanted to stop my children seeing their father. But in reference to the legacy harms, this is a burden that I'm still carrying alone today in attempting to co-parent alongside an addict not in recovery and balance what is right and safe for my children. We've heard a lot of the evidence supporting the direct links between the disorder and criminality, but it's such a grey area when it comes to crimes committed by a loved one within the home, and emphasises further still the importance of effective change and awareness of this disorder. There is a lot of likely access to detail which can easily secure finance, bank loans, credit cards, car finance, not to mention the pawning of household items. I've been through it all. But to end, there's one occasion that will forever stand out above the rest and goes to highlight just how far this disorder can take a person. And it was the day my then-year-old son was forced to protest his innocence after being accused of stealing and losing £150 from his grandmother's purse. It was the same week a jar of coin savings put aside for Christmas had gone missing in our home. His face, when half-littered coin bags were found under his bed. And I can only hope, for all our family's sake, that that lingering memory doesn't last with him too. Thanks, Graham.
Nicola, thank you so much, and once again, thank you so much for being brave enough to share your experiences. I think it's important to say at this point that the work that we've been Beacon and ARA have been engaged in is been and around trying to change culture in the criminal justice system and to get gambling as a presence in the thinking. But it's also really important to say that we mustn't forget those that have been affected by another's problem gambling, and I think it's really important that we continue to see that there's the ripple effect of disordered gambling is massive. I am delighted to say, however, that we've secured some pilot funding to be able to develop some gambling those affected by somebody else's gambling hubs that we'll be piloting in the southwest and the northwest. And Nicola's been a great help in helping us to achieve that. Thank you, Nicola, once again. I'm going to move on now to Carwyn Gravel. He's the Divisional Director and Business Development at Forward Trust. Forward Trusts have been delivering services to their client groups in prisons and the community since 1991, and I know they've been doing some work recently in and around the gambling and prisons. I'm going to hand over to Carwyn now. So thanks, Carwyn.
Thank you very much, Graham. Indeed, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be taking part in this really important event. So many thanks for asking me to speak. So I'm going to be talking about what we know as an organisation about offenders' experience of gambling harm and how we need to respond. So I'll just give you a bit of information first about the Forward Trust. If I could ask you to go on to the next slide. So we deliver services currently do about 16,000 people a year, and the majority of those are involved in the criminal justice system. As Graham was saying, there over 30 years now, we've delivered drug and alcohol recovery services in prison. We're one of the main providers of substance misuse support in custodial settings. And recently we've also added primary mental health to our range of support, and we work in 21 prisons. Also recently we've started to deliver services to probation clients through being awarded contracts on the dynamic framework. So that's delivering personal wellbeing services, which includes access to family support and to mental health pressure in South East and East of England, and also accommodation services to probation clients in Wales. And we also deliver information, advice and guidance on employment in 11 prisons. So lots of contact with offenders and a range of services offered. However, the bulk of that has been historically and remains substance misuse and addiction services. So as part of that work, we've long been aware, anecdotally, that gambling was part of the complex picture presented by many of our substance misuse clients. And we were aware also that this seemed to be a growing trend, but this was all anecdotal stuff. So we wanted to get some data and decided to conduct a survey. So with funding from a regulatory settlement from the Gambling Commission, we got some funds to conduct a survey. And this was of substance misuse clients in our care. And this happened last summer. And as it says there, was the first survey of its kind to be conducted in English prisons. So we set out to explore three things: offenders' experience of gambling in prison and in their life before custody, the extent to which they perceive gambling as being harmful, and then whether more support was needed to address gambling harm. And we did the survey last summer during lockdown, during the height of lockdown, and so managed, with limited access to clients during this time, we managed to get surveys material under cell doors to people to participate, and we had a response from 224 offenders, which is just under 10% of our substance misuse clients. So what did the survey tell us? Well, the headline in terms of prevalence is that 1 in 4 of those respondents thought they had a gambling problem. A fifth then said they had bet money whilst being in prison in the last 12 months. And I remember these are people with very little access to money while serving the sentence. And also worth remembering that gambling is illegal in prisons. So these figures are bound to be somewhat of an underrepresentation. But that 1 in 4, I think, is a very significant figure in terms of people thinking they have a gambling problem. So in terms of perspectives of perceptions of how problematic gambling has harmed people, on the next slide, you'll see listed here aspects of life that have been affected according to people's responses. 16% saying gambling had caused health problems, 13% said their gambling had caused financial problems, 5% losing their jobs due to gambling, 11% outlined they'd experienced relationship issues, and 14% saying they'd experienced debt due to their own gambling. Then on to the next slide, which looks at what people said in terms of what they felt to be the need for support. 75% of participants strongly agreed that gambling can become a serious addiction like drugs and alcohol, and over half of respondents thought it would be beneficial for them or other people to receive support for those gambling problems whilst in prison. There was a general sense that things haven't got particularly worse since lockdown. Only 7% thought that it had. So there was a sense that this was an established problem and not made worse by the challenges of lockdown. So that's the data from the survey. We also have a lot of anecdotal insights. Maybe an obvious point, but worth emphasising that gambling leads to debt, and in prison that can often lead to very serious violence to the person inside, but also often and tragically to family members outside as well. Now, even though there's a recognition that gambling can lead to problems, there's a general sense that it's actually normalised within the prison setting, despite being illegal. It's generally seen as being a harmless pastime and a bit of fun. Sorry, we just go back to the previous slide. Yeah, so there's that perception, and I think that extends to prison officers as well, alongside a sense of the prevalence of gambling problems amongst the prison officer population as well, and generally a poor awareness of the problem amongst staff on the ground in those prison settings. So yeah, moving on to recommendations, then I'd say our survey gives us some insights, but we need more data, and there's absolutely a need for systematic screening to measure the extent of gambling harm among the offender population. Absolutely welcome what's been launched through the work of Graham and others with the Bet You Can Help training resource. That would be incredibly useful for upskilling and raising awareness among staff who are working with the offender population. Prison officers, as I mentioned, organisations like ourselves, healthcare providers in prison. But just going back to what Andrew Nielsen was mentioning right at the start as well, in relation to probation officers, and there's a terrific opportunity to work with them and those organisations providing services through the new dynamic framework to embed that training. Certainly across my organisation, we're very keen for everybody to take that up. And then finally, looking at support models, then absolutely a need for a step model of care which is equivalent to or integrated with drug and alcohol services. It absolutely needs to be, to use Nia's phrase, a seat at the same table there. The awareness raising workshops and brief interventions, counselling and group programmes certainly needed, but I think really take what David Best was talking about earlier, about the importance of access to recovery communities of lived experience. That's essential to recovery in our experience in drug and alcohol problems, and I'm sure it's the case in gambling as well. So yeah, really look forward to be a part of further work in this area, and as a service provider with a significant reach that we have to the offender population, really want to reach as many people as we can. Thank you.
Carwyn, thank you very much. And I think as one of the themes has been going along, and as the work of the Howard League have been showing, that I think what we need is to have a change of culture across all of the criminal justice settings that identifies gambling as an issue. Really, I think, and to be fair, it's no different to some of how gambling has been seen in the wider community. So this is not a criticism of the criminal justice system, but an observation. And things have moved on, and I think we need to ensure that we upskill the people, give them the right training. And we talk about screening. I think you're absolutely right in terms of gambling being seen as a bit of fun. It's seen as a bit of fun everywhere, and thankfully it is in the main. But when it gets out of control, then the harms are exponential. I also think sometimes it's seen by prison officers as people being quiet as well. So there's a double bubble for it. But that's just a cultural and training and educational need. And I think whilst we do need more research, you're absolutely right. We need screening research to talk about numbers, but we know enough to make a difference now, and then we can build upon that. And I really like the idea of a step care model. So thank you very much for your presentation, Carwyn. We're going to move on now to Aaron Mansfield, and he's an education manager for the Royal Society of Public Health. And Aaron's probably, over the last 9 months or so, Aaron's probably spent more time with me than he would like to, really. And it's been fantastic working with the Royal Society of Public Health and getting the tackling gambling related harms level 2 course together with them. It's just fantastic. And I think here's an organisation that is all about culture change. So over to Aaron. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, Graham. Could never spend enough time with you. so don't worry about that. Hi everybody, great to be on the call today and to follow such brilliant speakers, and particularly Nicola, who spoke so bravely and powerfully earlier. Here to talk about our work around gambling, and particularly the Level 2 award in tackling gambling related harms, which a couple of speakers have referenced so far. Just to give you a bit of intro to RSPH, which is the full name, Royal Society for Public Health. We're an independent multidisciplinary campaigning and education charity. We're based down in London but operate across the 4 nations. We're a membership organisation, so we've got 6,000 members from students to fellows across what we rather grandly call the global public health community. We're an Ofqual regulated awarding organisation, so we have 60 different qualifications spanning health improvement, pest control, health and safety, delivered to 40,000 learners each year. We have an external affairs function, so Graham referenced our work around culture change, so we carry out research on issues that affect the public's health, particularly those that are slipping under the radar, and developing policy recommendations to try and improve that situation. Then we design and deliver regional and national programmes to protect and improve the public's health, and that's both targeted populations and population level health improvement. That can range from e-learning to train-the-trainer courses, and in the last 9 months, as Graham has mentioned, that's focused on the Level 2 award in tackling gambling-related harms. So just to give some insight into our policy campaigns and advocacy work, so that tends to go down 2 channels, one being about environments and the other being about skills and knowledge. So just to go from top left, we have Oliver High Street, and this is a piece of work we ran called Health on the High Street. And that looked at how what's on our high street can shape our choices around health and wellbeing. So to draw a very crude picture, if our high street is full of empty shops, payday lenders, bookmakers, fast food outlets, our choices around health and wellbeing are much more constrained than if we have greengrocers and chemists in green spaces. The bottom left picture, we had a report called Life on Debt Row, and that looked at the impact of debt on mental health, especially the impact of high cost credit. Top right, we have Go in the Distance. So this looks more at skills and knowledge. So we have a work stream called the Wider Public Health Workforce. So how can we identify individuals who aren't classically considered public health professionals, but who have an opportunity to have public health conversations and upskill them. So this report was looking at how we could work with exercise professionals, such as personal trainers, so that they can have conversations around mental health as well as around physical health. And the bottom right, a report called Moving the Needle, which looked at the barriers to vaccination uptake, a subject which has obviously been in vogue over the last 18 months or so. Our work around gambling all stems from the Gambling Health Alliance, which is a consortium of organisations that we convene, which comes together to look at the issue of gambling-related harms and to develop policies and campaigns that can raise awareness and address them. We have members ranging from Beacon and Nara through to the Royal British Legion and colleagues in primary care. If anyone's interested in finding out more about the Gambling Health Alliance, it's completely free to join, then feel free to get in touch with me after this call. Some specific outputs that we've done around gambling in the past 2 or 3 years. We had a report in late December 19 called Skins in the Game, which looked at the relationship between young people and gambling. That was a series of surveys and focus groups across England, Scotland and Wales. And the 2 areas where young people told us they were particularly concerned were around gaming and gambling, particularly loot boxes and skin betting, and the relationship between gambling and sport. We had a campaign early this year called Putting a Lid on Loot Boxes, which called for loot boxes to be recognised as forms of gambling, which is something that the government are currently looking at. And we also have a free e-learning programme called Understanding and Responding to Gambling Harms, which is completely free access, and it's designed to give professionals an early insight into the signs and symptoms of gambling harms and how you might support somebody affected by them. So again, that's available via our website and it's completely free access. I know I'm preaching to the choir on these statistics, and I think after the presentations earlier, I don't need to make the case anymore for them, but these are a couple of the more shocking statistics I think that are out there around gambling harms and gambling related harms. So we have 55,000 children and young people estimated to be experiencing gambling problems. And you think of the long-term impact of that, it's truly frightening. And I think Neil mentioned this statistic earlier. Odds ratio of suicidality in harmful gamblers 5.3 times higher than the rest of the population. And we know that COVID had an impact too. So recent gamblers, 15% had increased time and money spent gambling during the pandemic. And as Graham said just now, for lots of people, that gambling won't cause harm, but for a significant proportion, it will do. So making sure we address that and signpost support and treatment is really important. And this is a graphic from Police and Health and the College of Policing. But again, I don't think we need to make the case for this being a public health issue. For us, it's about prevention. So how do you raise awareness and address stigma? And particularly taking this issue to communities, not waiting for communities to come to us, but getting out there and raising awareness within communities. It's then a skills and knowledge piece. So how do you train up those people in the wider public health workforce to be able to spot the signs and symptoms of gambling harms and to be able to signpost people to support and treatment? And then just touching upon our qualifications. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 40,000 learners take qualifications each year, and they range from level 1. So lots of entry-level qualifications that are often taken in settings such as prisons and young offender institutions, up to level 3. And they're all delivered through our centres. So there are accredited delivery centres across the UK who range from local authority public health teams and NHS trusts to independent consultants. And a lot of this work has been delivered with, in health justice settings and with blue light organisations. So the picture in the bottom left is in a young offender institution in the West Midlands. They found that when young men came to the institution, they had to stop smoking. They couldn't move around as much. And the unintended consequence of that was often their weight went up. So we delivered our young level 2 award for young health champions, supported them to have a voice around health and wellbeing and to lead campaigns in the institution around the importance of health and wellbeing. We have also worked with West Midlands Fire Service. They had a project called Safe and Well, which involved fitting smoke alarms in people's homes. And they often spotted that the causes of preventable fires were health related. Could be poor mobility, could be poor mental health. So we trained West Midlands Fire Service on level 2 award in understanding health improvement. Again, giving them skills to just have that brief conversation with an individual and to signpost them to support and treatment if that was needed. And over the last couple of years, we have delivered the ACES Support Hub with Public Health Wales. So this was a project with the police in Wales to support an ACES informed approach to policing. So we've hosted that hub on our website to again focus on prevention and early intervention around ACES. So coming on to the level 2 award, a couple of people have mentioned this already. So this is a fairly new qualification that we developed with our friends at ARA, Beacon Counselling, and also Unite the Union. For Unite, this will sit in their workplace charter programme. So they'll be training people to give help and support to colleagues in the workplace if they're affected by gambling and gambling-related harms. There's a few motivations for us in developing this. One is something which I think Neil touched upon earlier, is about giving gambling harms that parity with other public health issues. If you're looking for a qualification or training around alcohol misuse or substance misuse, you'll find plenty. If you were, before this qualification, looking for one on gambling and gambling-related harms, you wouldn't find anything. So it's about giving gambling harms that parity. Also providing recognition to those working in this space. We all know lots of people doing brilliant work around gambling-related harms and supporting people affected by those harms. So it's about giving them that recognition that comes with an accredited qualification. And Neil also mentioned about standardised messaging, so making sure that the messaging we are putting out there is replicable across all those settings. So the qualification gives you that standardised messaging. It's a level 2 qualification, so it's roughly, these are never a perfect measure, but roughly equivalent to a GCSE in terms of standard. And it's Ofqual regulated. So Ofqual are the qualifications regulator in England. So it's seen as gold standard in terms of validity. It has a guided learning hours of 5 hours, so 5 hours spent per tutor, and a total qualification time of 6 hours. So it can be completed in a day. And as Neil mentioned, it's built into that Bet You Can Help model that Neil and his team run so brilliantly. It's assessed by a multiple choice question assessment, and we think this is crucial. It's another plus to a qualification. With the assessment, it means that the learners walk away with the confidence that they've got those skills and knowledge that the qualification promised to give them. So it's a short 25 question assessment at the end of the day, and the pass rate is 17. So again, it just gives them that security and confidence that they have picked up the skills and knowledge that they set out to achieve when they set the programme. And there are 2 learning outcomes. So very crudely, again, they fall under the issue and how we can form part of the solution. So the first looks at understanding the nature of harmful gambling and gambling-related harms and their impacts on health and well-being. So that looks at definitions of gambling, definitions of harmful gambling, the scale and severity of the problem, the signs and symptoms of harmful gambling, and then the impact of harmful gambling on health and well-being. And the second learning outcome looks at screening tests. So how can an individual carry out a brief screening test around gambling and gambling-related harms? How someone could be signposted to support and how you can start a conversation with somebody around gambling-related harms. The barriers to accessing treatment and support and how they might be overcome. And then finally, the organisations that are out there which can provide that support, many of whom are on the call today. And then just very briefly to touch upon a couple of projects that we're also running around this qualification. A couple of years ago, we had a program called Communities in Charge of Alcohol that we delivered in Greater Manchester. And that was training up alcohol health champions who would be based in communities and could raise awareness of harms related to alcohol misuse and then signpost people that they came into contact with, friends, family members, colleagues, to help and support. And we trained up over 120 alcohol health champions in Greater Manchester as part of that project. They delivered 249 audit C-checks, which is a brief screening intervention, and had over 1,000 brief conversations around alcohol harms. And something we're currently working on, again in partnership with Neil and colleagues at Beacon, is a Communities in Charge of Gambling project. If I could go to the next slide, please, that's okay, James. Thank you. So that's applying that same methodology to a new area of the public health. And that comes back to what quite a few people have mentioned today about going out to communities, not waiting for communities to come to us. So we're training up individuals in the level 2 qualification and combining that with a training workshop to give them the skills to raise awareness about the importance of gambling harms in communities. And they develop a local action plan with their local authority. So they might sit down and say that in Bolton or in Derby, we feel we've got an issue around gambling and young people. And they might carry out a series of education interventions in schools and colleges, for example. But just an example of how we're using the level 2 qualification as part of this. But really excited to see, to be here today to see how it's been built into Bet You Can Help and to see how that can make a difference to the criminal justice sector and the people that we all work with. And then my details. So if you've got any questions about the qualification or any of our work, then feel free to get in touch after today. Thanks, Greg.
Aaron, thank you very much, mate. Thank you very much. And I think it was really, really important to say some of the drivers for getting this qualification together and some of the drivers that we're having for cultural change. I think you mentioned that we can no longer wait for people to come put themselves forward for services or come forward or seek them. And that what we're trying to do is we've called that an island model, where we sit on our island waiting for people to come to us. What we're trying to do, and particularly in general terms as a public health message, but is to take knowledge and services to communities. And I think upskilling communities and having people in the communities that are able to help people access the skills and knowledge and services that they need, I think, is vital. And as part of the level 2 course in the Bet You Can Help program, I mean, all of that comes as well as as well as a qualification comes with a first aid manual that people have to reference. It's very much a public health messaging and tackling the blockers for people accessing the knowledge and the skills and building a bigger conversation. Thank you, Aaron. That was fantastic. We're moving on now to Janet Mayo, and who's the clinical lead for Cheshire Integrated Health and Liaison and Diversion Services. And Janet leads the forensic medical services to the police. So thanks for being here today, Janet, and over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been involved within gambling harm for the last 6 or 7 years. And I was first introduced to Neil Platt via the police in Cheshire when there was a clear relationship between gambling harm and the criminal justice process. And that was introduced through the fraud team and a gentleman by the name of Brian Faint, who no longer works for Cheshire Constabulary, but works closely with Neil in Beacon. And initially we were introduced because of that clear sort of connection between problematic gambling or gambling harm and then criminality. And then we looked at it from a health point of view and what we were doing within the criminal justice process at that time and how we could improve our sort of service to meet the needs of the individuals within the criminal justice process. So the first thing we did was we jointly got together, we did some educational pieces for the team in Cheshire, and then we completed a pilot study, which was, first of all, just approaching the service users within Cheshire and asking a question around gambling, their sort of history of gambling, and if there was any harms in relation to that gambling. Then about 3.5 years ago, we were commissioned by both NHS England and Cheshire Police to provide an integrated service, which meant that, as well as forensic medical services, which is my own responsibility, we then worked in collaboration and in partnership with 2 NHS providers, both who were liaison and diversion services. So as Nicola Tully's just given you an overview of the liaison and diversion services across the national programme, we work very closely with 2 organisations now within Cheshire. And I think fundamentally the first thing that we identified was looking at gambling and the related harm and criminality to do with gambling as a vulnerability. And if we could identify it as a vulnerability, we can then ask some questions around that. So part of our screening programme, we then introduced questions in relation to someone's gambling habits, and also the relationship of that gambling habit with others in the family, or even if they had someone with their own family who may be gambling, which opened up the questions, which allowed us to then look at any issues, identify that vulnerability, and then look at that diversion programme that we could do, which was then with Beacon Counselling Trust, and we could then refer those individuals, which we then could see as having some harmful behaviour and possibly bordering on problematic harm, and we could divert them into services at that point. What we did was we introduced that within our clinical systems, our sort of digital portal systems, to make sure that we could sort of audit those that were coming through the criminal justice process in Cheshire. We could build a pathway then on looking at who was coming in and how we could support them. It's been integral for us to have liaison diversion services working closely with us. It meant that we then have a better understanding of the patient journey through the criminal justice process, not just only in the custody environments, but within communities, courts, and outside organisations, probation and prisons themselves. And it's hopefully looking at that person through that journey. And I think what we said earlier about, you know, the pulling them out of the river when they might be drowning and looking upstream, you know, there's a lot of work going on now, especially with the new sort of training platforms that Public Health are looking at, to give, you know, health professionals like ourselves, liaison and diversion services, the ability to be able to further educate and have that knowledge to support our service users within the criminal justice programme. But we're picking them up when they've actually come into custody. Sometimes it's not because of gambling related issues, but as we've heard throughout this presentation and training delivery, it has been through other criminal aspects, domestic violence, alcohol, drugs, mental health. You know, all of those can be impacted and encircled around the gambling harm. And as we spoke to Nicola very eloquently about her own experience, clearly that had a massive impact on her, her family, her wider community as well as the individual that was gambling. So that's where we are at the moment in relation to what we deliver in Cheshire. So we've worked very hard on developing our partnership with the liaison and diversion services to ensure that everyone that comes through custody, which is our commissioned contract, is that we see 100% of everyone that comes through the door. So everyone that is arrested and brought into custody will engage with ourselves either through forensic medical services, liaison and diversion services, or actually between both of us together jointly in ensuring that we can pick up on those concerns, identified risks, and then hopefully look at diversion into services. So a brief overview really of what we've been doing in Cheshire and continue to do as well nationally through our other commissioned contracts.
Janet, thank you very much for that. And I think it's a fantastic insight into how changing thinking slightly and changing the way that we tackle things and identifying new issues and concerns as they come live can actually have a real impact. So what we've got now in Cheshire, I guess, when you're seeing all of you get 100% visitation with your services, we can screen for problem gambling issues, and I think that's changing culture and system change. Living it's not the final product, but it's a fantastic start, and I think it's great work. Thank you very much, Janet, for your time.
You're welcome.
Okay, so now we're going to go to our final speaker on the list, and we've kept the best till last, as always. Is our friend Jess from GRIO. GRIO are a fantastic organisation, and they understand systematic issues with gambling and hold a vast knowledge hub. And we've been working with Jess to develop a safer gambling movement and the Bet You Can Help programme from a logic model and from a theory of change. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you to our friend from over the water, Jess.
Thanks, Graham. So we can go to the next slide, actually. Oh, sorry about that. So my name again is Jess Bowl. I'm the evaluation lead at GRIO. It looks like hopefully the rest of the slides look okay. But what I'm here to do today is talk to you about the nuts and bolts of the Bet You Can Help program, and specifically, where we're anticipating it will go in terms of the outcomes that we'll be evaluating. So what I want to do is I want to first start talking about the Safer Gambling movement. So this is a program that Bet You Can Help sits within, and it's really important to for me to take the time to do that so you can understand the bigger picture of this public health approach that has been alluded to many times in these presentations before me. I then want to talk a little bit about the evidence around mental health first aid approaches in criminal justice settings and in other settings, just to set the stage a little bit. And then I'm going to finish with the theory of change. I'm going to walk you through the Bet You Can Help theory of change, some of its key activities, and the outcomes that we expect to see over the next couple of years. So if you're not familiar with GRIO, we like to refer to ourselves as a berry band of nerds. We support evidence-informed decision-making. And we've worked in the safer gambling field for more than 20 years, and with a large emphasis on research synthesis, knowledge mobilization, and evaluation. So I mentioned the safer gambling movement, and of course, I wish I could spend more time talking about it today because it's pretty exciting, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flavor. So if you haven't heard of the safer gambling movement before, which is being led by RM Beacon, it is a really important grassroots public health approach to reducing gambling harms. So we think about public health approaches, it's really important to have a lot of work going on the ground, as well as the kind of top-down policies. This movement is really more focused on kind of the community level, but of course making important connections with policymakers to hopefully influence policies that are coming top-down as well. And, oh, you can go back one slide actually. And before I kind of talk about some of the outcomes, what I want to say is what really makes this movement different is it's focused on identifying unique opportunities to think differently about the way that gambling harm is addressed in Great Britain. And again, if you've had the pleasure of working with Neil and Graham from RM Beacon, it won't surprise you that they have this sort of relentless hunger and kind of pursuit to do things differently. And it's really contagious, which I think is why we're all here today. They have a way of getting you excited about their vision, which becomes a shared vision. And it's really this kind of organic snowball effect of bringing partners along for the ride and helping partners empower themselves to find opportunities to address gambling-related harm. We'll do next slide. So some of the outcomes that the Safer Gambling movement, again, this is the big kind of picture approach that Bet You Can Help sits within. The outcomes that we anticipate it will achieve are really rooted in the national strategy. They're really, that's the scaffolding for this whole movement. It's really meant to support the work that's already being done. So in the first 1 to 2 years of the Safer Gambling movement, we're really looking to see increased awareness of gambling-related harms, increased population knowledge of safer gambling strategies, and starting to see people and organizations pilot different ways of thinking and doing so that these can eventually be scaled up. In the intermediate term, we're looking at sustaining and growing the legacy of the national strategy, as it reaches its sort of end and the subsequent strategy or whatever comes next happens. It's really important that the work that's being done in the next year or two have an opportunity to be sustained and grown. And we're looking to see outcomes related to the normalization of gambling-related harms in those conversations, earlier identification of those at risk for experiencing gambling-related harms, which is a core aspect of the Bet You Can Help program, and access to treatments and supports being improved and effective policies and programs being scaled up. And I won't go into great detail about a collective impact approach, but basically that's what this whole Safer Gambling movement is rooted in. Even though RM Beacon are the backbone organizations that are bringing this to life, it cannot and will not come to fruition without the partnership of other organizations who have a shared vision. And it's really important that we're having these conferences, these opportunities to collaborate so that we can have sort of shared vision, shared measurement going forward so that we're most as effective and efficient with the resources as possible. The long-term vision and the impact that we intend to see is reduce harm from gambling and its comorbidities, and really this vibrant public health approach to reducing gambling harms, bringing it more from words that we're using to actions that we're doing, and that's critical. And as we've discussed many times before in these conversations today, gambling-related harm intersects with other social determinants of health and other types of health and well-being areas. So by doing this work in gambling harm reduction, we're going to make a significant contribution to improve population health and reduce health inequities. So that's the Safer Gambling movement. And we do have a theory of change available for that on our website with the complete description. So my email is at the end if you'd like a copy of that. I want to talk a little bit about the mental first aid model because that's what Bet You Can Help is based in. And you've already heard a bit of evidence today about the importance of having community integration. David was talking about social capital and that connectedness. So these mental health first aid courses have been implemented for many years, most often in substance use and addiction and mental health. And those courses have been evaluated and found to improve knowledge of mental health issues and first aid strategies, increase confidence in providing first aid to people experiencing mental health issues. And that confidence piece is so huge because that's what's going to bridge that gap to action. Decreasing stigma of mental health issues and increasing mental health support provided to others. So just to kind of give you an idea that there is a pretty good base for mental health first aid models in general. They have also been applied in criminal justice settings, but I have to say that what's really unique about this program is that, to my knowledge, I only know of one other mental health first aid program for gambling specifically, and I don't know of any others that are mental health first aid for gambling in a criminal justice setting. That's based on my knowledge to date. I could be wrong, but why that's really important is because it emphasizes that there is a unique opportunity here to contribute to the evidence base of what works, and as Carwin was saying, get some data around actually having those screenings done and look at measurements of harm in these settings. But the mental health first aid models that have been applied to the criminal justice settings, like perhaps for substance misuse, for example, they've been designed for individuals working from law enforcement, dispatchers, probation officers, and the list goes on. So they've been applied and evaluated with good outcomes. And specifically, they've been found to increase mental health literacy, increase awareness and understanding of how to respond to individuals experiencing mental health issues, increase the ability to identify a range of mental health issues, and increase awareness of community-based mental health services that can be referred to upon release. They've also been found to increase preparedness to appropriately address people experiencing mental health issues, increase that comfort level so you're likely to have that conversation, and then remove false beliefs and misconceptions. So you can keep it there. Yeah, so what the really important thing of this mental health first aid approach is that it decreases stigma, increases skills, and makes a person more likely to interact and have that kind of first conversation. So the Bet You Can Help, which is what the Level 2 award in tackling gambling harms is rooted in, that model. I'm going to very briefly go through the theory of change. I know we're going to be tight for time. Again, we do have a complete copy of this available if you'd like to read through it. My email's at the end of the presentation. So the crux of this, the Bet You Can Help training, is this RSPH course. And in this RSPH course, we have these core modules that cover education of gambling-related harms, how to identify indicators of gambling-related harms, strategies to intervene, knowledge of safer gambling strategies, and the ability to signpost to safer gambling and treatment resources. So basically, by giving people the education to have that kind of first conversation and say, you know, are you okay? And kind of identify if someone might need to be signposted to something. That's hopefully going to get people the help they need a lot quicker. And in addition to the full RSPH course, there are brief workshops, which was mentioned earlier, and ongoing promotion and partnerships. The Bet You Can Help is applied to many settings. Criminal justice is just one setting. So the main course is the RSPH core modules, but then we have these specialized modules that are sort of an add-on for those different populations, including the criminal justice setting. So everyone's getting the same sort of base level of training and understanding so that they can feel comfortable to intervene. But then there are also modules that are tailored to those specific settings, knowing that every setting requires a little bit of a different approach. So really briefly, I'm just going to highlight the expected outcomes of the Bet You Can Help training. So in the short term, we're looking really at outcomes related to education. So increasing access to this training by having these conferences and getting people on board to offer them in their settings. And really at the training level, increasing their knowledge of gambling related harms, of supports that are out there so that if they identify someone, they actually have somewhere to send them. And then their willingness to actually intervene and have those really important conversations well before someone experiences severe harms, and to make sure that they don't get lost. The medium-term outcomes, we're looking at kind of engagement-related outcomes. We're hoping to have a large-scale uptake of Bet You Can Help training across cross-sectoral stakeholders, and certainly that's already in the works through the RSPH course, through criminal justice, and a couple others that Graham mentioned. And why this is so important is, just like David mentioned, it goes beyond the individual to have community-level benefits. So at a population level, we're looking to have we're expecting to have earlier place-based identification for gambling-related harms. So anyone experiencing harms wherever they are in the health and well-being or other sectors like education, criminal justice, etc., they can get the help they need when they need it. And then all of these work towards improving population-wide use of treatment and prevention services. As Neil mentioned, shifting from, I think, 3 to 15% in this population. And the ultimate impact is by asking the right questions at the right time, we can prevent lives from being lost or negatively affected from gambling-related harms. It was a really, really brief overview, really quick, but there is my email, and I'm happy to send you the theory of change for both programs I mentioned today.
Jess, thank you very much, and thank you for explaining that so eloquently. We've been we're running close to time. What I will ask is I will ask the people behind the scenes. I think we don't really have time for questions, but I think I'd like to thank Ian and James for answering questions as they've come up. I've enjoyed being the host for this conference. Some of the questions that came up, and some of the questions that Jess posed with, or some of the explanations Jess posed in and around the Betty Can Help program. I think the one thing that I think I would like to do is ask Neil if he could just come back for the final 2 minutes and just say how people can access some of the training and the Betty Can Help structures. Is that okay, Neil?
That's fine, Greg. Is that we have currently funding to access those 3 levels: the Betty Can Help Now, Betty Can Help, and the Betty Can Help Train the Trainer package for community-based programs around families, South Asian community, the workplace charter, and obviously our criminal justice work. I think the email is down on the bottom about registering interest. Please send an email to Andrew Oakle at Beacon Council and Trust. Andrew is corralling this, right, and all of the various applications, and then we'll be getting back to people in the not too distant future. Our intended timescale is to start to running these level 2 courses towards the end of this month. We've been running some pilots around the framework that Jess indicated. And one of the things, just to give people some comfort, is that the early feedback from these courses is that Betty Can Help most certainly works, and it provides the skills, the knowledge, the understanding to engage with gambling-related harm within the community, or within communities, as we often state. So, you know, we're quite energized with this. I think the other thing, just I don't know if you can see it in the camera, this is just going out to print currently, meaning if you can go out to print. It's an 81-page manual, yeah, which our vision is that it will be the side of basically of everyone's desk, yeah, or those who are engaging at a touch point within communities with regard to gambling related harm. We really want to change the landscape here in a way that's never been done before. And we're energized that we're making some real progress. We have a real blend of subject matter experts. We are immersed in lived experience across all of our programs. And we're really, really energized to have the support of the Royal Society of Public Health and GRIO as partners in this project. So excellent piece of work. Start to be rolled out. This last quarter is last quarter of the year, very, very busy quarter for us. But we think that we're on a journey here.
Thanks very much, Neil. I just finally like to remind people that if they could, when they log off, when they see the survey, if they could take a couple of minutes to do that. I'd like to thank all of our brilliant speakers. I think it's been absolutely excellent, and some of the feedback has been, so far has been fantastic. And thank you everybody for your time, and have a good evening. Thanks very much.